Shabbat Shalom. What's so bad about holding a grudge? We talked about this in the Torah portion. We didn't get a chance to talk about it together. In last week's Torah portion of Kiddushim, we are warned not to hold a grudge. But I mean, really? What's so bad about holding a grudge against someone? If you're in your office and some other guy in the next cubicle takes credit for a project you were working on, and then it comes time for a, shall we say, serendipitous opportunity to knife him in the back. What's wrong with that? Right? He started it. I mean, you're supposed to let him get away with it. Or maybe you're not going to knife him in the back, but when the boss asks, who came up with this brilliant idea, and this time it really was the schnook in the other cubicle, you don't volunteer that information. Why should he get credit even for something he did when he stole credit from something that I did? I won't deliberately harm him, but I'm certainly not going to speak up on his behalf. Because after all, look what he did to me, right? Holding a grudge. It's cathartic, isn't it? It feels good to hold a grudge. You get that nice cold rock right there in the center, and yes, you can rely on it. It becomes very, very dependable for motivation. Okay, obviously there are some emotional and psychological reasons not to hold a grudge, hinted at by my sarcasm at the end. But what are the actual moral reasons not to hold a grudge? Why would the Torah tell us not to hold a grudge? And it's not just because of our psychological health. Because God doesn't hold a grudge towards us. So one of it is it's a little bit self-serving. Every time we refuse to hold a grudge, we look at God and say, see, I didn't hold a grudge, so you don't hold a grudge against me, right? I am forgiving this person, you forgive us. There is definitely an element that we are modeling to God that we understand that the highest level of behavior is forgiveness, and that we are hoping God will continue to act with forgiveness and compassion towards us because God knows we need it. And so by not holding a grudge, we are imitating God as well as modeling for what we hope God will do for us. Excellent other reasons that God would tell us not to hold a grudge.
Without more tolerance, there'd be too many grudges.
Without more tolerance, without more forgiveness, without more understanding, without more reluctance to hold grudge, there would be too many grudges. I mean, after all, how big does a slight have to be before you will carry it for the rest of your life as ammunition in the ongoing grudge war that you have with other people? If someone cuts you off in traffic, are you going to follow them home? Are you going to write down their license plate number? You're going to look them up? You're going to see what you can do to shame them in front of their friends and families? Well, exactly how big does that grudge need to be before it becomes a worthwhile grudge? Now, this grudge is worthy. It's not a piddling grudge over trivial things. This person, I need to nurse this grudge for all time. If we have a threshold, it will eventually move to the bottom. And if we don't, well, then we run into the other problem. That is to say, if our threshold is very, very high, we then feel justified in our behavior towards that other person because of their behavior against us. Notice the unique trick that our Yetzer Hara, our evil inclination, does there. It tells you, you don't have to be good anymore because they have given you permission to be bad because they were bad first. It's a neat little trick, right? Because after all, it was only their good behavior that ensures our good behavior. That's what Torah is all about? Obviously not. God wants us to be good because that is the natural state we should occupy, not only because the other person has not yet been bad, but should they be bad, all bets are off, go ahead and stab them in the back as much as you want. Holding a grudge is giving yourself moral permission to behave in an immoral fashion because someone else did it first, at least in your estimate. It is the classic example of two wrongs don't make a right. Literally, you are giving yourself permission to behave abominably because someone else already did. And the Torah does not give us permission to bend the rules of what is right and what is wrong just because someone else bent those rules first. But all of you very cleverly have been watching the Haftorah with sharp eyes and keen ears as David read it. And let me get to the Haftarah point, I'm sorry. And what did we find? The Zadokite priests. I know, everybody is always talking about the Zadokites. Well, actually, when you read through Tanakh, they are kind of a big deal. But oftentimes, we don't know why they're a big deal. So let's do a little bit of history and find out whether we've discovered a grudge here or not. So who were the Zadokite priests, as opposed to all of the others? I'll give you a hint. It's in the name.
They were the priests who were descended from one of the sons, not
Well, no, they were from Zadok, right? They were the priests descended from Zadok, which is going to push us back one more layer of explanation. And he was one of the Kohanim during the time of David, specifically during the end of David's life. And he was on team Solomon, as opposed to the other priests who were on the team Adoniyahu, who was Solomon's brother, and we ended up with a lot of trouble there, like we did with most of David's kids. So, all of the non-Zadokite descended priests get cut out. They backed the wrong horse. They're on the wrong team. Therefore, from that point forward, once Solomon had been firmly coronated and ensconced in his position of power, you did not get to be in the priestly league, the high league. You could still keep your Kohen status, but you were not in the big league unless you were one of the children descended from Zadok. Is this a grudge? This literally became policy all the way up at least until the time of the Hashmoneans. We're talking hundreds and hundreds of years of the majority of Kohanim not being allowed to act as the big league Kohanim, because their great ancestors backed the wrong horse. Okay, it's not quite as simple as that. One of the frustrating parts of reading the Haftarah is that we only read a portion of any given chapter, and in this particular case, we can feel that even more acutely. Just before the section that we read today, we actually get a review of the other Kohanim, and it's not just about failing to back Solomon. It turns out that the other Kohanim did not take their isolation lying down. They did not take their demotion lying down. And in fact, as the kings and the rest of the nation of Israel became more and more corrupted by idolatry, they were perfectly at home serving within the idolaterized rituals of the people of Israel. The Zadokite priests, not so much. They still tried to maintain the actual rules of Judaism, but the other priests did not. So they would offer up sacrifices to idols, and they were official Kohanim, so hey, that makes it all right. Obviously, Ezekiel is saying, no, it doesn't, which is where our Haftarah kicks into gear, explaining that such behavior has, again, permanently disqualified all but the righteous Zadokite priest descendants. Everybody following me? So, is that a grudge? Is God holding a grudge? Is Ezekiel holding a grudge against the non-Zadokite priests? Is Ezekiel saying, you guys messed up, and even though the whole nation has done teshuvah, even though there has been forgiveness, else how are we back in the land of Israel, which is what he is predicting, even though all of that has happened, you still do not get to officiate because of the crime that you once committed. Aaron did a similar thing with the golden calf. The idolatry of the golden calf was a very unique version of attempting to worship Adonai, but in an incorrect way, as opposed to worshiping other gods, which is even more incorrect. But yes, Aaron's pardoning is also considered very controversial and difficult to understand. But we could look at that indeed and say, well, if Aaron got forgiven, why can't these guys get forgiven? Right? And if they are forgiven, why hold a grudge and keep them from officiating at the altar as their heritage should allow them to do. Let me tell you a different story, and then we can untangle the Zadokites, and then we can come back to understand that not all grudges are grudges, even if they get called grudges. So, everybody's favorite holiday, Purim. What is the one mitzvah that everybody knows, especially in college, about what you are supposed to do on Purim? Drink. Okay. It is a mitzvah to celebrate, and it is a mitzvah to celebrate in a way that will often move you to a higher state of consciousness. But the paradigmatic section of the Talmud that discusses the drinking on Purim actually concludes with a cautionary tale. It tells of Rabbah, one of the great sages of the Babylonian era, along with Rabbi Zera, one of the other great sages of that time period. And they get together for Purim, and they know how to put it away. In fact, they drink so much that Rabbah absolutely goes completely nuts and kills Rabbi Zera. That's a pretty bad drunken position. He wakes up from his hangover, sees the body of his dead friend, and prays for mercy and forgiveness, and Rabbi Zera comes back. Maybe it was just a flesh wound, maybe it looked worse than it was, but Rabbi Zera is restored to life. Yay! Not the end of the story. The next is one of my favorite sentences in the entire Talmud. The next year, Rabbah invites Rabbi Zera back to his place for Purim once again. And Rabbi Zera says, "Are you kidding me? Last year I went to your house and you killed me? You're asking me to come back again?" He says, miracles are not known to happen. Meaning, I'm not risking it again that you might kill me, because what if there isn't a miracle this time and I don't get brought back from the dead? Then I'll be dead, and that's a pretty bad thing. Is Rabbi Zera holding a grudge against Rabbah? No. He's afraid, right? He absolutely has forgiven his friend. I mean, clearly they're still on speaking terms. Clearly they still operate within the same rabbinic academy system. It's okay between them. But Rabbi Zera has learned to be a little cautious, especially around this time of year, and especially around Rabbah, who apparently has some unresolved issues that need desperate therapy. But he is not holding a grudge. Rabbi Zera is not giving himself permission to treat Rabbah badly. He is not giving himself permission to violate any of the mitzvot or other aspects of our faith. He is just recognizing that in light of the new information, that Rabbah can become murderous when drunk, that he needs to change his behavior. This is not meant as a grudge or act of vengeance against Rabbah. It's called learning from the situation that you are in. It is dealing with a situation that requires different rules than there were before the situation began. So let's back up to our story of the Zadokite priests. Is God holding a grudge? Is the nation holding a grudge against them? No, they are not. Instead, this is a new situation that is requiring a new set of rules. The new situation is marked, or marred, by the fact that the non-Zadokite priests had engaged not only in rebellion against David, but had also engaged in prolific and continual idolatry for centuries. That means that when the common people look at these Kohanim, what do they see? They see idolatry, and they see an echo of their own crimes, their own betrayal of God, when they and their ancestors worshipped at the idolatrous shrines that these priests were officiating at. It may not seem fair that having the whole nation be forgiven doesn't mean that they get to come back to the front of the stage to stand at the altar again. But unfortunately, at that point in history, the non-Zadokite priests represented in the consciousness of the nation idolatry, and there would have been a continual suspicion of idolatrous behavior should they be allowed to work in places of power and prominence, or to serve as the primary teachers, judges, and leaders of the nation. There was simply too much history in them for the nation to have them in that place. And so they were given different roles. Again, they were not taken out, they were not shot, they were not executed summarily. They were given different roles. They were still a Kohanic family, but they were not allowed to come to the altar because to do so would be too hard in this situation. It would be the equivalent of Rebbe Zera going to Rabba's house for Purim. It is not that they are holding a grudge against them. It is simply recognizing that sometimes you can't go back to the way things were yesterday when something has happened as severe as this. Oftentimes, we want to hold grudges. And as I said at the beginning, that's not good. The Torah tells us not to hold grudges for a reason, and we have to search our heart very carefully to find whether we are still resentful of so-and-so who didn't get me the right birthday present, or so-and-so who didn't invite me to their wedding, or who did invite me but sat me at the table with those people they know I shouldn't have been sat with because I've had a grudge against them for even longer, and now I've got 2 grudges because of it. Or the person in the cubicle next to me, or my neighbor who, remember that time that he did so-and-so. We have to ferret out those grudges that are still festering within us. The long nurtured anger that we continue to hold on to because of what someone else has done that we believe then gives us the right to treat them badly as well, to draw up battle lines and to throw our own weapons at them the way they have done us. That the Torah categorically says no. But we also have to be very careful that as we seek to give forgiveness, as we seek compassion and understanding, that we also do not expose ourselves to the same situation that led to whatever the problem was in the first place. Rabbi Zera figured that out, that you don't have to walk back into the guy's house and drink the same way you drank in the same opportunity for him to murder you. You can forgive him while still changing your behavior without it being holding a grudge, without you becoming that which you are angry about in the first place. The world is a constantly evolving place, and history is a constant guide to us, but it should not be a source of grudges, only of lessons. It should be a source that allows us to look at a situation and says, you know what, this is different than it was 5 years ago, 10 years ago. And even though I do not hold hate or anger or spite, I am not going to treat it as though nothing has happened in the intervening years. Instead, I will act differently. I will take different precautions. I will behave differently with regards to these other people, with regards to whatever situation I might find myself in. Without anger, without fear, without that overriding burden of grudging, we can find a good way to walk forward that will allow for justice, that will allow for goodness, and that will keep us from walking in a path of evil alongside those that we hold our grudge towards. It is not simple. As I've said so many times, Judaism never is, because life is a complicated place to live. And being human is not an easy job. God gave us the Torah to help us navigate this, to help us find that way, to avoid grudges, but not to avoid learning, to find a way to walk each day that is a little better than yesterday, and to make sure that any baggage from yesterday is left behind while the lessons remain intact. Shabbat Shalom.